Hello, my name is Reverend Dr. May Elise Cannon. Today is Tuesday, June 10th, 2025, and it's day 613 since October 7th of 2023. 613 days. Churches of Middle East Peace continues to call for a comprehensive permanent ceasefire that is so desperately needed for particularly people in Gaza who have been suffering from acute malnutrition and even starvation, with dozens of deaths because of lack of access to food, let alone basic health services, medicines, and other life-needed supplies. In Gaza, Israeli gunfire in the last 24 hours killed at least 17 Palestinians and wounded dozens as crowds of displaced Palestinians approached the U.S. and Israel-backed Gaza Humanitarian Foundation's aid distribution site. Separately, the authorities said that an Israeli strike on a house in central Gaza killed 8 people. Israeli forces and Palestinian gunmen fired on Palestinians headed to the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation's aid distribution site in Rafah yesterday. So this was Israeli forces and Palestinian gunmen firing on Palestinians heading to get aid. This is according to witnesses. The health ministry said 6 people were killed and 99 people were injured from areas designated for aid collection, while GHF said that the site did not open yesterday. Hamas yesterday denied that the GHF's Saturday accusation that the militant group threatened over the weekend to attack workers of the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation. So they denied that claim and prevented aid from being distributed. In a statement, Hamas accused GHF of lacking neutrality, stating that the group is a propaganda front for the Israeli occupation army. The New York Times reported that, and a UN spokesperson yesterday said that a minimal supply of flour the UN has been able to bring into Gaza in the last 3 weeks was mostly looted by armed gangs or taken by starving Palestinians. Israeli security forces have committed a crime against humanity of extermination by killing civilians sheltering in schools and mosques. That's according to a report by the United Nations Independent International Commission of Inquiry on the Occupied Palestinian Territories. That report was released yesterday. This article's in Reuters. The report finds that Israeli security forces committed the war crime of directing attacks against civilians, and that the conduct of the Israeli security forces amounts to a war crime of willful killing. Now, many certainly in Israel would say that the United Nations is not objective by any means, but even the former Prime Minister of Israel, Olmert, has said that the actions of Israel via Gaza constitute a war crime. Israel killed 3 medical services staff and a journalist during strikes on a Gaza City neighborhood yesterday. And so the attacks on Gaza continue as people in Gaza still do not have access to food and basic services. Lord have mercy. And one of the things that has been happening is that international advocates have been seeking to get into Gaza. We've been talking the last several days about the Madeleine, the ship that was carrying a symbolic amount of aid into Gaza, but had several activists aboard it. Swedish climate and human rights activist Greta Thunberg yesterday, that ship was seized, and the people that were on the ship, the Freedom Flotilla, were taken into Israeli security custody in Ashdod. They were then detained and held and questioned in Tel Aviv. Reports indicated that they were being forced to watch the video footage of the October 7th attacks by Hamas. I haven't seen whether or not that was verified, but Greta Thunberg yesterday departed Israel alongside other activists, and Israel's foreign ministry wrote and updated that on social media today. At least 5 other activists detained by Israeli forces on an aid ship bound for Gaza have refused to agree to depart voluntarily and will be deported. That's according to France's foreign ministry. Now, while the Madeleine activists were being deported, a convoy of buses and private cars has departed for Gaza from Tunisia in North Africa as a part of a group of efforts by activists, lawyers, medical professionals from North Africa to spotlight Israel's blockade on humanitarian aid to Palestinians in Gaza. The overland effort has been organized independently, but moved up to coincide with the flotilla as made of activists and numerous other professionals. It plans to traverse Tunisia, Libya, and Egypt before reaching Rafah. The border crossing with Egypt has remained largely closed since Israel's military took control of the Gaza side. They're talking about the Philadelphia corridor, where Israel took control in May of 2024. The Tunisian civil society groups behind the convoy said their aim is to demand the immediate lifting of the unjust siege on the Strip. They asserted that Arab governments haven't pushed enough in the last 20 months of war between Israel and Hamas. In Yemen, the Israeli Navy today said it had struck Houthi targets in the red port city of Hodeidah, alleging that the rebel group used the port to transfer weapons. A local TV that's Houthi run said that Israel targeted the port's docks with 2 different strikes. And in Iran, Trump said yesterday that Iran appeared to have rejected the U.S. demand for Tehran to stop enriching uranium on Iranian soil, stating that Iran is just asking for things that you can't do. I talked about that more yesterday. That was actually in a conversation with Prime Minister Netanyahu on the phone. Middle East Concern reported today that 2 believers have gone into voluntary exile from Iran to escape harsh penalties in the aftermath of raids by intelligence officers. 149 and another 55 were tried in absentia in April and convicted over Article 500 of the Penal Code of, quote, propaganda activity of defiant Christian Zionist belief opposed to the system of the Islamic Republic of Iran. They were each sentenced to 10 years in prison and were convicted for smuggling prohibited goods, for which they received 2 years and were fined. The Trump administration in the U.S. and his top foreign policy officials have discussed U.S. strategy on Iran's nuclear crisis and the war in Gaza in an hours-long Camp David retreat on Sunday. According to U.S. officials, Trump, Vice President Vance, Secretary of State Rubio, Secretary of Defense Hegseth, Chief of Staff Susie Wiles, Special Envoy Steve Witkoff, CIA Director John Ratcliffe, and Director of National Intelligence Tulsi Gabbard, and other senior officials attended those meetings. Trump also spoke with the Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu, as I mentioned yesterday, and that was reported on widely in Israel. A congressional update, I've talked about this a little bit, but I wanted to make sure you knew about 2 House resolutions. House Resolution 473 was introduced last Wednesday, June 4th, by Jayapal, Raskin, Keating, Balint, and Fushi. They introduced a resolution calling on the Trump administration to use all diplomatic tools at its disposal to ensure humanitarian aid reaches civilians in Gaza and to bring about the release of hostages. As of June 5th, it had 91 sponsors. And House Resolution 3565 was introduced on Thursday, June 5th, by Representatives Ramirez, Jacobs, Jayapal, and Pocan, introducing the Block the Bombs Act. I talked about this a little bit. The bill would stop the transfer of certain offensive weapons to Israel and ensure that Israel is in compliance with U.S. and international law. The legislation focuses on the worst offending weapons that are supplied by the U.S. and have been involved in the grossest civilian casualties and documented violations of international law in Gaza. This would not impact the Iron Dome or Israel's ability to defend itself. That's a direct quote. As of June 5th, it had 22 House members. And so I wanted to let you know that that was happening on Capitol Hill. We should just be reminded that President Biden did put a hold on 2,000-pound bombs, but President Trump lifted that hold in one of his many executive orders very early on in his presidency. I wanted to close with a voice of Christians from Jerusalem. A Jerusalem Voice for Peace is an ecumenical group of clergy, very esteemed, bishops and leaders, priests, Catholic and otherwise. And they put out a statement yesterday that we posted on our Prayers for Peace blog called an SOS for Gaza, Cast Your Nets Again. The ecumenical leadership includes His Beatitude Latin Patriarch of Jerusalem, Michael Sabah, His Excellency Greek Orthodox Bishop Attala Hanna, His Grace Lutheran Bishop of the Holy Land, Munib Yunan. He's the former presiding bishop of the Lutheran Church in the Holy Land. And they issued this call that begins by saying to every human being, every person with a conscience, to all lovers of peace, as Christians of the Holy Land, we're sounding the alarm about the recent unprecedented escalation in the Israeli war on Gaza. After more than a year and a half of death and destruction, this moment we find ourselves in now is terrifying. We are in essence sending an SOS. We need your help. The siege on Gaza was renewed on March 2nd, 2025, resulting in the longest blockade on the entry of food and other essential aid in the history of the Gaza Strip. A renewed Israeli military offensive was launched on March 18th of this year, and on that first day alone, hundreds of people were killed. Since then, tens of people are killed on an almost daily basis. Now, as we write these lines, the Israeli army is occupying more and more territory in the Strip, leading to more death and destruction. I'd encourage you to read that letter. It ends with this plea. We call on you, please try again, cast your nets again. We beg you, do not give up. Let us be filled with the energy of the resurrection of the Holy Spirit at Pentecost and recommit to fighting for life and freedom for our brothers and sisters in Gaza and everywhere else in Palestine, Israel. May we take those words to heart. Do not give up. They say, we beg you, do not give up. Cast your nets again. In the name of Christ. Amen.